Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're going to talk about the challenge of global decarbonisation, specifically looking at what actions industrial sectors can take today to ensure we have a sustainable future. Clearly, infrastructure professionals have a massive role to play when it comes to tackling global carbon emissions and climate change, in ensuring that the UK and all nations stay on track to meet the agreed net zero emission targets by 2050. Construction and operation of our built environment, after all, accounts for something like 80% of all emissions. But transforming the design and operation of our public and private infrastructure assets requires a systems approach. It is not something that any single part of the infrastructure sector can tackle alone. Rather, it has to be a culmination of many parts. Perhaps some might argue all parts of the built environment and industrial supply chain that support our modern lifestyles. And the most recent COP28 meeting in Abu Dhabi highlighted clearly that achieving consensus, well, it's not an easy task. An impossible mission, some might say. Not so my guest today. As Chief Executive of the Mission Possible Partnership, Faustine Delasalle no doubt argues that driving industrial decarbonisation across the entire value chain of the world's highest emitting heavy industry and transport sectors is not only possible, it is absolutely fundamental to securing our future business, social and economic lives. It's my pleasure, therefore, to welcome Faustine to the Infrastructure Podcast today to explain how this transformation is possible and what needs to happen to ensure that a net zero carbon emissions future is a reality by 2050. Faustine, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, let's get straight into the challenge, Faustine. The Mission Possible Partnership has set out to, as you put it, trigger a net zero transformation across a number of global, hard to decarbonise sectors. And we're going to talk in a moment about exactly what the Mission Possible Partnership is. But kick us off, how would you describe the role that infrastructure sector has to play to meet our net zero targets?
The Mission Possible Partnership focuses on what we've called the harder to abate sectors of the economy, which covers heavy industry sectors and transport sectors. And infrastructure really sits on both ends of those value chains. On the one hand, it's going to be a key buyer of some of those energy-intensive, carbon-intensive materials, if we think cement or steel, for instance. But on the other end, it's also going to be a key enabler of the transition of those heavy emitting sectors, because we'll need new infrastructure, new energy infrastructure, new transport infrastructure to be able to decarbonize those sectors. So it really is fully integrated with some of those heavy emitting pieces of our economy.
It is a huge part of, as I said, the system, I suppose, that makes up the whole of the supply chain. Mission Possible Partnership just published a series of sector transition strategies for action in this decade. Strategies that cover 7, as you say, hard to abate resource and mobility sectors. And you've got endorsement from something like 200 leading industrial companies. So you're covering a huge amount of ground there. The most recent of these was to create a real world roadmap towards net zero emissions in concrete and cement, which is, as you say, fundamental to infrastructure. Why do you think these strategies will make this real world difference?
So it's always difficult to say that a report makes a real world difference, right? But there's an indirect route to real world impact here. Because to develop those strategies, we've really worked with the whole industry and with the ecosystem around the industry and its value chain to create a consensus on what are the steps that are required to reach net zero emissions. And the creation of that consensus, more than the piece of paper itself by the end of the process, is what really matters here, because it enables then those players to have greater confidence that they can take the actions that are required to make change happen. That's really why we did it.
Right. It's interesting you talk about defining strategies that are aggressive, industry-backed, and you've got those 200 key companies involved, and you want to create a net zero pathway for each sector. How radical do we need to be? How do we balance, that aggression with, say, maintaining incentives?
So I tend to use the terms bold and brave rather than aggressive. Right. Just because what's really aggressive, if we're honest, is the impact of the climate breakdown already today on people, on livelihoods across the world, right? And so what we need is a response that is bold and brave, because if we don't do it, then the cost will be even greater for the populations across the globe. So we need to be very radical, but be radical knowing that the cost of doing nothing is only going to increase, while the cost of transitioning is only going to decrease. And so there's a real perspective here where if we move fast enough, it's going to become easier and easier to invest in the right technologies because their cost is going to come down. And therefore, it's going to become much easier to transition and to ensure that this benefits the whole economy and the whole global population as well.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. But of course, there's always a but, because clearly energy transition, the move away from fossil fuels towards renewable electrification is critical. But as we saw in the COP28, the petrochemical sector is still calling the shots. I mean, is this the problem?
I have a different read of what happened at COP28. I think the petrochemical sector tried to call the shots and still had influence, obviously. But we did manage to get a final text that embedded the term transition away from fossil fuels in global agreement for the first time. And we also had a package of announcements orchestrated by the COP28 presidency that, if delivered, could get us 3/4 of the way to a 1.5 degree trajectory by 2030. So it was a massive achievement. I'd say it's absolutely certain that the incumbent interest, it's oil and gas, but also industry incumbent interest, agricultural incumbent interest, you have the same in many sectors, are still dominating the political, financial, and economic landscape. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to play on two fronts. We need to really bolster the voice of the future players, youth, innovators, disruptors that are shaping the new economy. But honestly, if we want the politics of all of it to work, we also need to make the incumbent understand what they have to gain from that transition and what they have to lose if they don't transition. Because that's the way of mitigating their slowing impact on the transition.
I get that, and that's why you're the Mission Possible partnership, because you do take that. You have to take a positive glass half full view on it, which is fantastic. And I suppose it's also realistic. I mean, but from the perspective of the infrastructure professionals, I mean, is the future of a sustainable and resilient solutions ultimately about doing less? Or is there a genuine decarbonised pathway, for continued development? I mean, how do you see that challenge really translating into infrastructure?
I wouldn't necessarily say doing less. I would say right sizing. And I think that will look different in different countries. We'll need much more infrastructure in some developing economies going forward than developed economies. And we'll also have a difference between the next 25 years, where we'll need a lot of new infrastructure to support the transition and to support a greater resilience for the climate breakdown, than for the following 25 years, where we'll probably need much less. So it's more about doing the right infrastructure, less roads, more railways, less pipelines, more transmission lines in the electricity system, and doing it in the right way, using green construction materials, using smart design to use less materials, ensuring that the infrastructure is resilient to climate change. It's a fundamental rethink of the role of infrastructure, I think.
Right. Okay. Well, let's find out a bit more about the Mission Possible partnership. You gave us a brief outline at the start, but give us the elevator pitch. What is Mission Possible partnership, and I suppose how and why would the infrastructure professionals get involved?
The Mission Possible partnership was set up to decarbonize 7 heavy emitting sectors: cement, steel, aluminium, and chemicals in the industry space, and then trucking, shipping, aviation in the transport space. And we do that by fostering collaboration along the value chain and with financial institutions and governments. So it's really about mobilizing the ecosystem to make investments happen. And as we said at the beginning of this conversation, the infrastructure players are really a critical part of many, if not all, of those value chains. So they're essential to make the business case work for the energy intensive players and enabling that transformation.
Okay, and you've got you've got 4 core partners: the Energy Transitions Commission, which I believe you still act as vice chair; the Rocky Mountain Institute, founded by, of course, by energy guru Marie Lovins; an organisation called We Mean Business Coalition; and the World Economic Forum. I mean, there's some pretty big hitters on the NPP board. I mean, how do all the parts? How do they all fit together?
We're very lucky to be well connected to our 4 founding partners, but to a broader web of partners across the globe as well, and to many big hitting companies. And the way it works is really in the name of the organization. We're called Mission Possible Partnership for a reason, both because we believe that partnerships across the value chain are really important to make investment happen. One company alone is not going to move in the environment in which we operate today. And also because we believe to be more efficient, we need to partner up with many other organizations that have different skills than ourselves and that can bring their strengths to the mission. That's the way we operate.
So how do you make it happen then? I mean, is it more than just a talking shop, or how do you make it more than just a talking shop?
It comes by phases. The first phase was probably more of a talking shop because you needed to create that shared vision across the industry on what a net zero transition could look like. But it's a talking shop embedded in facts and figures, because that's what makes consensus happen, is the realization that we all share the same facts and figures, even if we don't have the same way of interpreting those facts and figures. But we've now passed that stage, and the urgency in all of those sectors is to make investments happen. So now what we're doing is supporting specific projects around the world and really using that multi-stakeholder approach to see what are the precise actions that each player needs to take. The steel producer, its energy provider, the buyers of steel, the financial institution around the corner, and the government in that particular region, so that the business case for investment holds and that investment can actually happen. So it's becoming more and more practical over time.
Well, tell us about some of those projects. You've got a number on the go right now, but what are they and how do they help?
So we've been over the past 18 months supporting about 30 projects across the world, primarily in the US. We've been focusing initially in the US and we're now expanding in other geographies. It's projects like a sustainable aviation fuel plant, or the decarbonisation of a major cement plant, or the decarbonisation of a major steel plant. And so we're working hand in hand with the corporate that owns that asset, and helping that corporate figure out what are the right set of suppliers, what are the right set of buyers, what are the financing mechanisms that can help them close the case for their investment, and also what are the things that they can do alone to get there, but also what are the things that they will more powerfully do with others. For instance, to have a market for green cement, having a standard that defines what green cement is helpful. And so that's not something that one company alone can do. You need collaboration across the industry.
So it's effectively you are in many ways you are trying to close that system, or trying to create that system, and making sure that it works as a system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, big challenge. I mean, you've got your 2030 milestones. Real world minimum thresholds to make net zero viable by 2050. I think is the way you put it. I mean, how do they help?
I think what we've done that was quite new in our sector transition strategies is translate emissions targets into real economy targets. If I tell you we need to reduce emissions in the steel sector by 30% by 2030, you don't quite get what that means. If I tell you that that means having 70 iron-based steel plants up and running by 2030, you get a better measure of the scale of the challenge. And if I tell you that only 5 of those 70 required are currently under construction, you start being very worried about how we're going to build the other 65 in that period of time. So it just focuses the mind on exactly what needs to happen. And enables us to then go see the industry itself, but also governments and financial institutions to make them realize what is really required in practice.
Yeah. I mean, you've driven the formation of the Mission Possible Partnership over the last 6 years. I mean, is it fair to say that industry, in particular, maybe the infrastructure supply chain, has got some way to go before it really truly embraces, I suppose, the power of a decarbonised industry pathway.
Absolutely. I think that's why we initially called those sectors the harder to abate sectors, by contrast with the power sector or the road transport sector, which are moving faster, and we see clean electrification really gaining momentum in the past 5
So these are aluminium, cement and concrete, chemicals, steel, aviation, shipping and trucking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important for those sectors to realize that there are solutions to reach net zero emissions. And I think we've gotten there over the past 5 years. It wasn't necessarily an evidence to the sector 5 years ago. I think it is now. Now we're in this next phase of showing how it can be implemented in practice. And the more flagship projects we have that can show it can be done, I think the more confidence the industry will have to go down that way.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about you for a moment, Faustine. It's fair to say that you have quite a few jobs. You're CEO of Mission Possible Partnership since November last year, and you brought it into existence over the last 6 years. You're Director of Energy Transition Commission, where you worked for 7 years. You're a fellow at Global ESG Leader, One Purpose. I mean, it sounds like quite a lot going on. How do you balance and focus your time?
Everything I do serves the same mission, so that focuses you to some extent. And I currently, after 7 years at the Energy Transitions Commission, focus all of my time on industry and transport, wearing 2 hats still, the CEO of Mission Possible Partnership and the Executive Director of the Industrial Transition Accelerator.
I think you got more than 2. You got many hats there, many hats.
What enables it is great teams, let's be honest. The only way this works is by having tremendous teams around me in our organizations and in our partner organizations as well, who are driving this work on a day-to-day basis. I'm only the tip of the iceberg.
Well, you're French and you're based now in Lille, but you spent quite a bit of time working in London. And I presume your role now is fairly global. I mean, how would you describe your average week?
Being based in Lille with a team that is distributed across the globe, a lot of my week is on Zoom and Teams calls, with some travel, obviously, as well. It's really focused on multi-stakeholder conversations, and I spend my time speaking to different stakeholders across the ecosystem to both better understand what the challenges they face are, and how we can make them work together in a more productive way.
Your background is in economic advice to local and regional government and politicians, and in France there's plenty of those to advise. I think, how did that work prepare you, I suppose, ground you for the challenge of driving industry towards a net zero future?
I think politics taught me 2 things. One is that there is rarely a perfect solution. You have to choose between a few imperfect solutions. And that requires an art of compromise, but also an art of making hard choices. And so that's really key, I think, when we tackle something as difficult as the decarbonization of heavy emitting sectors. The other thing I've learned, and that's really by working in local authorities, is that behind any file, any issue on your desk, there are real people with real lives, real livelihoods. And whatever you do on those topics, you need to think about that and impact, and ensure that those people are brought on the journey with you, because if not, there will be social backlash.
Well, I imagine that's particularly evident in France, where you've got the mayoral system, which goes down at a real quite granular level, and they are real local issues that are really driving politics. It's I imagine quite an interesting and eye-opening process.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting to stay connected to that world, because when you operate, as you said earlier, with heavy hitters, CEOs of this world, you can lose track of those real economy impacts on real people on the ground. And I find it really important to stay connected to that level as well, to understand what will make or break the social acceptability of the transition that we're driving.
Yeah. I mean, clearly you're passionate about the need to drive down carbon. Would you describe yourself as a campaigner?
I don't usually use that term, but I suppose I am a campaigner. I try to be a doer as well. And hopefully the doing then inspires others and contributes to campaigning.
So what do you do when you're not working? You've got a lot going on there. How do you spend your time in Lille?
I have a 20-month-old daughter and I'm expecting my second child. So a lot of my time is going into family time when I'm not working.
Holy moly. I mean, you are genuinely very, very busy then.
Yeah, I am. But it's also a real pleasure and a real honor to be working on such fascinating topics with tremendous people day in, day out.
I suppose it also kind of like really kind of brings it home to what you're doing it for. It's for the next generation. It's there in front of you every day.
Yes.
So, what about a quick fire, personal? Let's talk about your sustainability credentials, Faustine. Are you about public transport or car use?
Public transport, biking, walking. I don't own a car and I don't have a driving license, so that helps.
Oh right, so that there's no point in asking whether you drive an electric car. Then you don't have a car at all.
No, we don't own a car at home.
Oh right, and in Lille is set up to make that possible.
Yeah, we can bike everywhere, which is really practical. But I used to bike everywhere in London as well.
You do a lot of Zoom calls. Do you fly? Do you fly for work? Do you fly for leisure?
Unfortunately, yes. I'm trying to limit it. I fly once a quarter max for professional reasons. And then I'm married to a Mexican national, which means that we're traveling once a year to Mexico to see family there. But every time I fly, I buy sustainable aviation fuels to compensate for that impact, encouraging everyone to do the same.
I mean, that is a interesting way to deal with it. And I suppose it's not always possible, but you live in Lille, so very well connected with the high-speed rail net, which I presume means that you don't need to fly domestic.
No, I do everything by train. It's actually the reason why we're in Lille is the railway system.
Yeah, got it. What about your home? What steps have you taken at home to reduce your carbon emissions?
Like many homes in France, we're fully electrified for all appliances, and then we buy 100% renewable power for all of it.
Great. Well, what's your biggest contribution? What is the biggest contribution to your personal carbon footprint, do you think?
Well, flights is definitely, unfortunately, still the big part of my carbon footprint.
Okay. I'm going to say nappies and disposing of them, but maybe not. I don't know.
I must confess I haven't included that in my carbon footprint, but maybe.
Okay, to be continued. Let's get back to Mission Possible partnership and creating sustainable and resilient infrastructure solutions. I mean, the podcast is titled The Global Net Zero Carbon Challenge. I mean, how do we make these solutions and the Mission Possible partnership ideas relevant to the infrastructure sector in, say, the UK? How do they get on board with what you're doing?
I think there's the carrot and the stick, right? The carrot is really that I do believe there are tremendous opportunities for infrastructure players in the transition. As I said at the beginning, all of those sectors that need to transition will need new forms of energy. Building the energy infrastructure to power all of those sectors is a tremendous opportunity for the infrastructure sector. Same thing on the transition of transport. We'll need new charging and fueling infrastructure for this new trucks and new cars and new planes and new ships around the world. So it is a tremendous opportunity for growth in the short and medium term. And I do think that policy is going to be tightened over time, and policy isn't always stable. There are sometimes 2 steps ahead and 3 steps back. But the direction of travel, especially as the effects of the climate breakdown strengthen, will be towards tighter and tighter regulation. And so players that prepare for it will be readier when the time comes.
Well, you talk about a 3-step plan to enable action, which ends with the need to provide proof that zero carbon value chains can work, and encourage others to follow. How does that happen in reality in your world then?
I think what's quite interesting to see is that the industry leaders in all of those sectors are becoming bolder and more confident when they see their competitors moving. And so when we have a couple of projects going ahead, showing that you can actually make money out of that transition, then the rest of the industry slowly follows. We need more and more of those leaders, which will trigger more and more followers as well, to get to the point where we reach scale.
Well, looking at those 7 sectors, I mean, where are the successes coming from first? And what are you learning about the relative speed of transition?
I'd say 2 things. One is that we've seen sectors like aviation, for instance, move faster over the past 4 or 5 years because there was regulation kicking in, both in the UK and in the rest of the European Union.
This is stuff which is mandating change.
Exactly. And so that really triggers investment. So it confirms that policy is a powerful tool to drive change. What I would also say is that we've seen a number of disruptive companies really decide to go much faster than the rest of their industry and build the first few plants. And that's across sectors, in steel and cement and aluminium, often doing it in partnership with the rest of their value chain and in partnership with their buyers in particular. And those proof points are really important now on the journey towards scale up.
Which is interesting, because I mentioned that you've got these big hitters on your board, the CEOs and global presidents from major firms in the sectors. Is success fundamentally down to leadership?
I'd say there are 2 ingredients: innovation and leadership.
Right.
And innovation is really important. I'm amazed every time I look at technology developments of how engineers and innovators are improving the quality and the price of new green technologies every 6 months. It's really impressive. But then if we want to scale those technologies fast enough, when we're really running against time, then you need leadership in the corporate space, but also in the government space.
I imagine that encouraging that good leadership behaviour, encouraging that investment in innovation, is key to really bringing on board more people.
Yes, and leadership can take many shapes and forms, but it really comes back to being brave enough to realize that not moving is not a solution. Because if you're not moving, then you'll face much more aggressive breakdowns a couple of years down the line.
Yeah. I mean, you've got some pretty punchy targets in terms of timings, things you're trying to achieve. I mean, for instance, in 3 years, all 7 sectors are making tangible commitments to action in the 2020s. Within 5 years, you've got 10 sectors covering 60% of global emissions. Climate action agreements have been adopted. By 2030, sectors have brought zero carbon solutions to market and started to deploy them at scale. And have begun retiring high carbon assets. I mean, there's something, those are big, difficult targets to hit. Are they possible? Where are the risks?
Well, the good news is we've moved a lot over the past 4 or 5 years. So 5 years ago, there was no consensus on how to reach net zero emissions. And I think, and that's what we've done through the development of those sector transition strategies, there's now a growing consensus globally in each sector on the need for net zero, the feasibility of net zero, and how to make it happen. So that's a major breakthrough in the past few years, even if it happens way too late. So now the focus is really on making projects happen. And the timeline are tight, because if we want to deploy those technologies on a very large scale in the 2030s, then we need initial deployment already by 2030. And for an industrial asset to be up and running by 2030, we need investment decisions to happen now, like in the next 2 years. So we're really running against time to get to those investment decisions in the next couple of years on a big enough cohort of projects that they will trigger learning curves, they will trigger economies of scale, facilitating further deployment in the 2030s.
And I suppose writing these things down focuses people's mind to actually make sure that they happen. Just to round us out, Faustine, back to the issue of leadership. I mean, what is your advice to young infrastructure professionals, for example? Well, I suppose any infrastructure professional for that matter, who is keen to lead the transition towards a net zero future, and you'd like to hope that includes all of them. But what's your advice? How can Mission Possible Partnership help them in this aspiration?
I'd say two pieces of advice. One is don't be afraid of asking the question, is there a different way of doing things? Because I think that's the question that most people struggle asking, but that's the question that then triggers change. The second is work with others. And these transitions are complex, and you need to partner up with many other players in your ecosystem to make change happen. And where hopefully MPP can help is that we have a lot of the data points that you may need, and the networks that you may need on that journey, and hopefully can inspire you with the stories that we're gathering.
Brilliant. Faustine, it is such a fundamentally critical issue. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast to explain it. You're taking on a massive challenge, but it's a hugely important one, perhaps the most important challenge. So thanks very much for sharing it.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to have this conversation.
Brilliant. Well, I'll leave lots of details about Mission Possible Partnership in the show notes for the podcast. So and lots of links to various projects that you've got going on there. So unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But we've got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline, and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the really big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website. That's www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share, and do sign up to the newsletter. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Faustine, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.